Some betrayals cut so deep, they don't just break your heart, they shatter the world you built around it. Welcome back to Wives Gone Wild. Thanks for joining us today. Where are you tuning in from? We love knowing where these wild tales reach you. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Ben, and I believed I had it all. A thriving business, a beautiful family, and friends who felt like brothers. But life has a cruel way of hiding the cracks beneath what seems perfect. Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. It started like any other day. The Florida sun cast golden light across my backyard, reflecting off the pool I had worked so hard to afford. My wife, Laura, moved through our home with effortless grace, making last-minute plans for the weekend ahead. I watched her from the doorway, feeling the familiar comfort of routine. Our annual guys' trip was finally here, a sacred tradition where I, along with my closest friends Roger, Scott, and Stan, would escape to the lake for a few days. No responsibilities, no stress, just fishing, cold beer, and the kind of conversations only lifelong friends could have. It was a chance to breathe, to step away from the relentless grind of running my business. Laura and the other wives had their own plans, a weekend of wine, spa treatments, and gossip in the very home I built for her. We had an unspoken agreement. She didn't question our lake trips, and I didn't ask about their girls' weekends. It was the kind of trust one thought was unbreakable. But trust is a fragile thing. As I loaded the last of my gear into my truck, I had no idea I was about to make a mistake that would cost me everything. A simple forgotten bait box. That's all it took. One absent-minded moment sent me driving back home, stepping into my own house at the exact wrong time. What I overheard that day didn't just change my marriage, it changed who I was. I had barely left the driveway when I realized my mistake. My bait box, the one I had spent days crafting, was still sitting on my workbench. Any other day, I would have shrugged it off, but for me, fishing wasn't just a hobby. It was a ritual, a craft, an art. That lure wasn't just bait, it was my ticket to the perfect weekend. So, I turned the truck around and headed home. 7 minutes. That's all it took. I parked quietly in the driveway, noticing how Laura's car was still there, along with the other wives' vehicles. Their weekend of luxury had already begun. I figured I could slip in, grab my bait, and leave unnoticed. After all, the last thing I wanted was to walk in on their wine-fueled gossip and get an earful about how we men never understood real relaxation. I entered through the side door, careful to avoid the kitchen where they were likely gathered. My workshop was tucked away near the patio, just beneath one of the house's large, shaded windows. As I approached, I heard it, the laughter. At first, it was harmless, the kind of carefree giggling that came after a few glasses of Chardonnay. Then, I heard my name. I paused. It wasn't the first time Laura and her friends had talked about us guys. Over the years, I'd heard my fair share of inside jokes, playful jabs, and exaggerated complaints about husbands who just didn't get it. That was normal. But this time, something felt different. The tone, the undertone, was off. I moved closer, the laughter lowering into hushed voices. My name came up again. Then another name, Stan. My grip on the doorknob tightened. Stan, I wasn't the jealous type. I wasn't the paranoid husband who checked texts or tracked locations. I trusted Laura. But something about the way they said his name sent a strange chill up my spine. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just their usual gossip. But my gut told me to listen. So, I did something I never thought I would. I pulled out my phone. Not to snoop. Not to spy. But because I thought it would be funny. I figured I'd record a snippet of their conversation, catch Laura saying something embarrassing, tease her about it later, maybe even use it as leverage to get out of a future couple's dinner. I hit record. And within seconds, my entire world fell apart. I stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The conversation started innocent enough. Laura, my wife of 20 years, the woman I built a life with, was bragging about me. About us. Bob has always been incredible. He takes care of me. He provides. He's amazing in bed. I could never complain. For a moment, I smiled. There she was, my wife, telling her friends what a great husband I was. Then, the next words hit me like a freight train. But you know, after so many years, the passion just fades. It's normal, right? Another voice chimed in. Emily. So is that why you did it with Stan? The air left my lungs. Stan? Laughter followed, but it wasn't playful. It was knowing. It was cruel. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My wife, my Laura, let out a nervous chuckle. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. I swallowed hard. You cheated on Bob? Someone gasped. Laura sighed. She sighed, as if the confession was a burden she was tired of carrying. It wasn't planned. It was just one of those things. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Every word stabbed deeper, each syllable twisting inside my gut like a knife. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to demand answers, but I was frozen. They were still talking, and I needed to hear everything. Laura's voice softened, tinged with something I couldn't place. Regret? Nostalgia? Lust? Stan was heartbroken when Susan left him. He needed comfort, and I was just there. So you comforted him with sex? Emily teased. More laughter. Oh, come on, Laura said. It wasn't like that at first. We just talked. He poured his heart out, and I felt drawn to him. I didn't mean for it to happen, but silence. Then, a whispered confession that shattered me. It was the best sex I've had in years. A strangled sound crawled up my throat. My stomach twisted, while rising, rage and heartbreak battling for dominance inside me. I could barely breathe. My wife, the woman I had given everything to, had been with another man. Not just physically, emotionally, and worse. She missed it. She fantasized about it. About him. I should have stopped listening. I should have walked away before I lost myself completely. But I couldn't. Because then, she said the one thing that destroyed me more than anything else. The worst part? I still think about it. Even when I'm with Bob. My world fractured. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped my phone. My breath came out in ragged gasps, my pulse roaring in my ears. I wanted to storm in, to confront her, to demand an explanation. But there was no explanation that could fix this. Laura wasn't just unfaithful. She was gone. Even when she was with me, she was with him. I thought betrayal was a single moment, a cruel, sharp break. I was wrong. Betrayal is slow. It seeps in, poisons everything, until you wake up one day and realize. The person you love? They left you a long time ago, and you never even noticed. The drive back to Roger's house felt endless. I had left the workshop in a daze, barely aware of my own footsteps as I slipped out the way I had come, silent, invisible, broken. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, the recording still playing in my ears like a haunting echo. Laura's words wouldn't leave me. It was the best sex I've had in years. I still think about it, even when I'm with Bob. Each sentence felt like a blade, twisting, cutting deeper, shredding the life I thought I had. The worst part? I had no idea what to do next. I wasn't ready to confront Laura. Not yet. The anger was too raw, too consuming. If I faced her now, I wasn't sure what I would say, or what I might do. So, I did the only thing I could. I drove. By the time I pulled into Roger's driveway, my face was streaked with silent tears. I never cried. Not like this. But tonight, the weight of my wife's betrayal crushed me. Roger was already outside, loading his Escalade with fishing gear. He glanced up as I stepped out of my truck, and immediately, his expression shifted. Bob. His voice was laced with concern. You okay? I swallowed hard. No, I wasn't. But I wasn't about to spill everything in the middle of his driveway. Just a migraine, I muttered, forcing a weak smile. Been a long week. Roger studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, you don't look great. Why don't you go inside and rest for a bit? We'll be heading out in 30 minutes. I exhaled a shaky breath. Yeah, thanks. Inside, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind spiraling. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Part of me wanted to turn the truck around, storm back home, and demand the truth from Laura's lips. But another part, the logical part, knew that wouldn't be enough. She had already told the truth. Just not to me. No, confronting her wasn't enough. I needed a plan. Because if Laura thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, if she thought I was going to keep playing the role of the devoted, clueless husband, she had another thing coming. The next morning brought no relief, only more questions. I woke up in the cabin, staring at the wooden ceiling, my mind still replaying every sickening word Laura had said. My body felt heavy, as if the betrayal itself had settled into my bones, weighing me down. The guys were already up, moving around the cabin, laughing, joking, completely unaware that my world had shattered overnight. I forced myself to get up, to go through the motions. coffee, breakfast, packing up the gear. Every movement felt robotic, my mind trapped in an endless loop of rage, heartbreak, and the one question I couldn't escape. What now? I wasn't the same man who had arrived at this cabin, and I damn sure wasn't leaving as him. We hiked down toward the lake, our boots crunching against the forest floor, the scent of damp earth thick in the air. Roger and Scott walked ahead, lost in conversation, while Stan trailed just a few steps in front of me. My hands curled into fists. Stan, the man who had smiled in my face, called me his friend, worked beside me for years, and all the while, he was screwing my wife. He had no idea what was coming. A few yards ahead, I spotted a thick, fallen branch, about the size of a baseball bat. I barely thought. I just acted. I grabbed it, felt its weight, then swung. The crack of wood against flesh echoed through the trees as I slammed the branch into Stan's shoulder. He barely had time to turn before he collapsed to the ground, gasping in pain. "This is for sleeping with my wife." The words came out calm, steady, but inside, I was shaking. Not from fear, from pure, burning rage. Stan groaned, clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in shock. I wasn't done. I stepped forward and kicked him, hard, right between the legs. His body jerked, his breath hitching as he crumpled completely, curling in on himself. I stood over him, watching him writhe. My breathing was ragged, my pulse hammering against my skull. The betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, it all came pouring out in that single moment. I wanted to hurt him. I wanted to break him the way he had broken me. But violence wasn't the real punishment. No, the real punishment was still coming. Stan groaned, eyes fluttering open, his face pale with pain. "What the hell?" he gasped, still winded. I crouched down, grabbing his shirt, forcing him to look at me. "I know everything," I said, my voice low, dangerous. "And you're lucky you're still breathing." His eyes widened. I leaned in. "Don't talk to me. Don't talk to Laura. And if you so much as whisper a warning to her." I let the threat hang in the air, watching him swallow hard. "You'll regret it for the rest of your life." A moment of stunned silence. Then, Roger and Scott appeared from the trail, running toward us. "Bob, what the hell are you doing?" Roger's voice was sharp, eyes darting between me and Stan, who was still gasping on the ground. Scott bent down to check on him. I didn't move, didn't answer, because right now, nothing mattered except what came next. I had the truth. I had the proof. And soon, Laura was going to feel every ounce of the pain she had caused me. The drive back to the cabin was silent. Roger and Scott didn't press for answers, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Stan sat in the back, his face pale, his breathing shallow. He didn't say a word. He knew better. Inside, I poured myself a drink and sat at the table, staring at nothing. The adrenaline was fading, but the rage still simmered beneath my skin, hot and unrelenting. I could still feel the weight of that branch in my hands, the crack of it against his body. It wasn't enough. Beating Stan wasn't enough. Because he wasn't the only one who had betrayed me. Laura. Her voice from the recording still played in my head, over and over, like a song I couldn't turn off. It was the best sex I've had in years. I still think about it. Even when I'm with Bob. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to march home, throw her things into the street, and end it right there. But that would be letting her off easy. No, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a screaming match. Laura needed to feel this. She needed to experience what it was like to have the ground ripped out from under her. I had the recording. I had proof. But proof wasn't enough. She had lied to me. She had used me. She had humiliated me. And if I confronted her the wrong way, she'd twist it. Cry. Play the victim. Maybe even try to turn our friends against me. I couldn't let that happen. So, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to let her expose herself. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold smirk curling at the edges of my lips. Laura had no idea that by the time I was done, she'd be the one begging me to leave. And I would. But not before destroying the fantasy she had built for herself. Not before making her feel every ounce of the pain she had buried in me. Not before taking back my life. The moment I walked through the front door, Laura was waiting for me. She had dressed up, hair curled, lips painted, wearing the perfume she knew I loved. She smiled as if nothing had changed, as if she wasn't the woman who had whispered another man's name in the dark. "You're back," she said, moving toward me. "I missed you." Her arms wrapped around my neck, and I let them. I let her press against me, let her lips graze my cheek. But I didn't move. I didn't respond. She pulled back, her smile faltering. What's wrong? I forced a tired sigh, rubbing my temples. We need to talk. Laura stiffened, but she recovered quickly, laughing lightly as she took my hand and led me toward the couch. Oh, that sounds serious. I sat down, watching her closely. Every movement, every twitch in her expression. She thought she knew me, thought she could read me, but she had no idea that I had already read her. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eye. There's something I need to tell you. Her expression shifted, lips parting slightly, her hands clasped in her lap. She wasn't nervous. Not yet. I leaned forward. I've been with someone else. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a second, Laura didn't move. Then, her entire face changed. Her body tensed. Her eyes darkened. The smile vanished. What? She whispered. I kept my voice calm, even. It wasn't planned. It just happened. The exact words she had used to explain her affair. Laura's breath hitched. You cheated on me? I still love you, I said, repeating her own excuses, watching them land like blows to the chest. It didn't mean anything. It was just sex. She shot to her feet, color draining from her face. You. Her voice cracked, her hands shaking. How could you do this to me? And there it was. The anger, the betrayal, the utter hypocrisy. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. I don't understand, Laura. Why are you so upset? Her mouth opened, but no words came. She knew. She knew exactly what I was doing, but she didn't want to admit it. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You said it yourself. It was just one time, right? That doesn't erase our marriage. It doesn't erase everything we've built. Laura flinched, her body going rigid. She knew. I let the moment settle before delivering the final blow. Unless cheating actually does mean something? Her lips trembled. She clenched her jaw. Then she did exactly what I knew she would. Get out, she snapped. Pack your things and leave. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Wow, that was fast. She didn't care. She was too angry to see what was happening. You disgust me, she hissed. You think I'd stay with you after this? You're just like my father. A liar. A cheater. I will ruin you in the divorce. I let her rant. Let her scream. Let her say every ugly, self-righteous thing that came to her mind. Then I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the table and hit play. Her voice filled the room. The giggles, the whispered confessions, the betrayal she thought would never come back to haunt her. Laura froze. Her breathing hitched. Her hands covered her mouth as she watched her own lies unravel in real time. The woman who had just threatened to take everything from me was now crumbling in front of me. I leaned back, arms crossed. You were saying? She turned to me, tears already welling in her eyes. But there was nothing left to say, because she had already made the rules. I was just playing by them. Laura crumbled. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, as if touching it could somehow erase what was already done. The recording kept playing. Her laughter, her confessions, the way she had dismissed me so effortlessly while reminiscing about Stan. The betrayal played in her own voice, echoing through the room like a death knell for everything we once were. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Bob. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Please. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I just stared at her, feeling nothing but a dull, empty ache where love used to be. You didn't mean for me to find out? My voice was calm, measured, but laced with something cold. Not that you didn't mean to cheat. Not that you didn't mean to lie. Just that you didn't expect to get caught. She shook her head violently, stepping closer, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. No, I said, my voice firm. You don't get to touch me. Laura let out a choked sob, her entire body trembling. I love you. Bob, I swear I love you. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. But I never stopped loving you. I let out a slow breath, rubbing my jaw as I studied her. Really studied her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I married. Or maybe she was, and I had just been too blind to see her for what she really was. Funny, I murmured, shaking my head. Because when I told you the exact same thing, when I pretended to cheat, you didn't even hesitate to throw me out. You didn't even consider forgiving me. Laura froze. Her lips parted as if she had something to say, but she had nothing, because she knew I was right. You were ready to take everything from me. I continued. My home, my business, my money. You were ready to humiliate me, ruin my life. And all over a lie. But now that it's you, now that it's real, you want mercy? She broke. Her knees buckled as she dropped to the floor, her hands gripping my shirt as she sobbed into my chest. Please, Bob. Please. I can't lose you. I can't lose our family. I let her cry. Let her beg. Let her feel, for the first time, the fear of losing something she thought she could control. Then, when she finally looked up at me, eyes desperate, searching for any sign of hope, I gave her none. You already lost me, I said, stepping back. The moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. Laura let out a strangled sob, shaking her head. No, no, Bob, please. But I was already walking away. I had made my decision. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt free. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed. Our bed, though it didn't feel like ours anymore, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. I could hear Laura sobbing in the guest room, muffled cries pressing through the walls like a ghost of the life we had just lost. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It wasn't just between me and Laura. It ran deeper, poisoning the very foundation of the people I trusted. Because it wasn't just my wife who had betrayed me. It was our friends, too. The next morning, I sent the recording to Roger and Scott. No explanation. No warning. Just the raw, undeniable truth in Laura's own voice. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By noon, Roger had kicked in my front door, his face red with rage, his phone still clutched in his hand. How long have you known? His voice was low, sharp, dangerous. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling calmer than I should have. Since the trip, Roger ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of my living room. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Mary knew. She knew, and she didn't say a damn thing. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? We both knew what was coming. By the time Roger stormed out, his marriage was already over. And Scott, his reaction was worse. He called me that evening, voice shaking with barely contained rage. Bob, tell me Emily didn't say what I think she said. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. I could picture it. Him listening to the recording, hearing his wife giggle and say she envied Laura, that she wished she had done the same. I'm sorry, I said quietly. And I was. I wasn't the only one who had been living a lie. Scott hung up. The next day, Emily moved in with her sister. One recording. 3 marriages destroyed. The damage was done. And somehow, through it all, Stan stayed silent. I don't know if it was fear or shame that kept him quiet. Maybe both. Maybe he thought disappearing would make it all go away. Maybe he thought I would be too distracted by the mess to come after him. He was wrong. Because I wasn't finished. Not yet. I still had one final move to make. And Stan? He was about to find out exactly what it felt like to lose everything. Stan thought he could walk away from this. For weeks, he avoided me. He skipped our usual gatherings, kept his head down at work, acted like if he just stayed quiet, I'd let it go. Like I'd forget. Like the man who betrayed his best friend and stole his wife could just fade into the background and move on with his life. But I wasn't done with him. I had been quiet. I had been patient. But now, it was time to take everything from him. I met with my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Beth. The same woman who had helped me structure my business, who knew every contract, every clause, every loophole. The same woman who had once been friends with Laura, but after hearing the recording, had made her stance crystal clear. She gets nothing, Beth had said coldly. And as for Stan, you're going to enjoy this. I leaned back in my chair, watching as she flipped through paperwork, a slow smirk playing at her lips. He signed a non-compete when you promoted him, she continued. Which means starting his own pool business. Poaching your clients. She slid the contract across the desk. That's breach of contract. And legally, you can take him for every penny. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of months of betrayal settle into something cold. Controlled. Calculated. Do it. Stan didn't see it coming. One morning, he opened his door to a lawsuit for $1 million. Breach of contract. Client theft. Financial damages. He panicked. He tried to negotiate. Tried to call Roger. Tried to call Scott. But they wanted nothing to do with him. He had no allies. No one left to protect him. For months, he fought it. Hired a lawyer. Tried to play the underdog, the poor guy being crushed by corporate greed. But the facts didn't lie. The contract was ironclad. The case was airtight. And when the final ruling came, I won. Everything Stan had built for himself was gone. He declared bankruptcy, lost his business, couldn't even get a decent job because, after everything, his reputation was ruined. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was done. Stan wasn't my problem anymore. Laura wasn't my problem anymore. And now, I was finally free. Laura stayed in the guest room for another month. At first, she tried everything: apologies, promises, even desperate attempts to seduce me. She would linger in the kitchen when I made coffee, brush her fingers against my arm, wear the perfume she knew I loved. I didn't bite. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was just someone who used to be important to me. The house was big enough that we barely had to see each other. I worked late, spent weekends out, made it clear there was no coming back from this. Then, one night, I came home to find the guest room empty. Her suitcases were gone. No note, no goodbye, just an emptiness where she used to be. And I felt nothing. The divorce was quick. Beth made sure of that. No spousal support. No financial gain. Laura walked away with what was hers, and nothing more. And me? I walked away with peace. But the damage she caused didn't stop at our marriage. Mary left Roger. Not because of what she did, but because of what she didn't do. Keeping Laura's secret, protecting the lie, had cost her everything. Roger couldn't look at her the same way. And in the end, he didn't want to. Scott stayed with Emily, but things weren't the same. How could they be? She had admitted she wanted to cheat, that she envied Laura's affair. It wasn't an affair, but it was enough. Enough to break something between them. Enough to make Scott wonder if, one day, she'd stop thinking and actually do it. Our entire friend group. ***, the years we spent together, the bonds we thought were unshakable. ***, all of it was gone. I thought that would bother me. But all I felt was relief. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone my loyalty. Not a cheating wife. Not a lying friend. Not a circle of people who had been laughing behind my back. The past was gone. And my future? It was mine to build. The first night alone in the house should have felt strange. For years, it had been filled with Laura's presence. Her voice, her scent, her laughter. But now, it was just quiet. And I liked it. I poured myself a drink and stepped onto the back patio, staring at the pool. The same pool I had built for her. The same home I had worked myself to the bone to provide. For the first time, I wasn't looking at it as hers. It was mine. Everything I had built, everything I had given, everything I had fought for, none of it had ever been for me. I had spent so much of my life making sure Laura was happy, making sure she had everything she wanted, that I never stopped to ask myself if I was happy. Now, I had the chance to find out. I started dating again. Slowly, cautiously. And then there was Becky, my secretary, the woman who had been by my side through all of this. She was younger, full of energy, with a sharp mind, and an even sharper sense of humor. And she looked at me like I was something worth holding on to. Laura must have heard about us because one night, I got a text. "Do you ever think about me?" I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could have told her the truth. That I did sometimes. That I still had moments where I'd catch myself reaching for a memory before remembering it wasn't mine to hold anymore. But the thing was, it didn't hurt anymore. I had moved on. So I deleted the message, left her on read. And then I turned my phone over, took Becky's hand, and stepped into my future. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back.